The mission of Clearyst is to provide clear ESG value and impact through B2B sustainability tech solutions. We do this by helping businesses become more sustainable. So that's our entire mission and what we do. We're building a platform with a suite of software products to help companies do this, to become more sustainable and provide value for the businesses themselves and all stakeholders. We saw SF Climate Week as an opportunity to bring together some business experts that we have here on this panel to talk about the latest trends, dynamics, and themes in the world of sustainability and discuss them from a business and financial perspective. So thanks for joining us here tonight to do exactly that.
Sustainability is this larger concept of a planet and culture and business that can persist and that can be resilient to shocks. So we're talking about stewardship of the planet, making sure that communities that businesses operate in can persist and that coexist with those businesses. ESG is a toolkit for understanding how resilient, risk-averse, and sustainable a company is. So when we talk about ESG with large institutional investors, we're using ESG tools as a way of peering into a company and looking at risks and opportunities that perhaps haven't been captured by traditional financial metrics. I was at a conference last month where a big investor said that some politicians telling states that they can't use ESG metrics is like asking him to cross a busy street and only look one way. So ESG is a whole set of tools for doing diligence and looking at companies and investments in a way that brings to the surface risks and opportunities that maybe haven't been uncovered yet.
From an E perspective, we're talking a lot about E today. Look no further than the country of Germany. They're highly dependent on fossil fuels, in some ways even historically single-threaded to Russian oil delivery. And in a new world order, there are very real economic consequences associated with that. From an S perspective, we have a labor force that is changing dramatically. We're losing the most productive parts of our labor force in the form of baby boomers. Skill-based development and skill-based development investments are going to be critically important. There's very real economic consequences there. From a G perspective, I look in the backyard here, being in San Francisco, no further than Silicon Valley Bank. There were some real governance flaws in that business where there was a lack of risk management that led to very real economic consequences. And so from that perspective, we have integrated fully our ESG research and our fundamental research because we believe that we're able to deliver both performance.
I think also taking the long view, which is what companies are doing, or in private equity, there is a little bit of a cushion there where you're not subject to quarterly earnings calls and things like that. So you have the opportunity to do just that, to take the long view. But absolutely agree, I think there's always a return on the investment that they're putting in. So for instance, in the G of ESG, you might not think of data breaches or ethical components. Those are all part of that G. And if the company does not have those in place, there are real downsides for them materially.
For the most part, ESG investments that companies make all have an expected return. These are not do-gooder moves or somehow a cost center for the majority of businesses in the country. So telling that ROI story is essential, and really understanding the story of risk-adjusted returns, of resilience of supply chains, of resilience of operating models, and companies' permission to operate and ensuring their continued permission to operate. Those are all parts of the equation that sometimes don't get factored in but really need to be. And the more that we have systemic shocks like energy prices in Europe, in Texas freezing a couple of years ago and no business could operate, these are real costs to the system. We're seeing it on the labor side where a lot of employers that don't have great employee engagement programs or that don't have great ways of taking care of their employees are having a harder time hiring right now. And that's absolutely getting in the way of their growth.
Kind of the locus of power shifting away from the governments and into the corporations. They're really taking matters into their own hands and leading the way. With global companies specifically, there are a lot of regulations already in place in EMEA, for instance, that force certain decisions to be made in a certain region, but those then trickle back to the U.S. We're seeing a lot of that, particularly in private equity. I would say all the EMEA portfolio companies, for instance, are up in arms about whether it's GDPR or a different regulation that they have to get their ducks in a row about. And then they see, oh, well, this might have positive net benefits that might be financial related. They may be the plus, the impact related. So they implement them across their portfolio globally. There are a number of different institutions where you can get specific metrics. The World Economic Forum, for instance, has the whole stakeholder capital framework, which hasn't really been implemented, frankly, in a lot of businesses here, but we're heading in that direction.
You have carbon removal and you have decarbonization. The best way that I like to explain this is in the concept of past versus future emissions that have taken or have not yet taken place. In the past, we can't really change what's happened. And so when we're talking about carbon removal and that whole industry, we're really talking about how can you remove what's already been emitted? Because the industries that are out there, they've already done the emissions. And so that's really the fundamental premise of carbon removal. When we talk about the future, those emissions haven't yet happened, but we know there will be some emissions. And so this is where understanding heavy industries or oil and gas or the energy markets, where are emissions coming from? Is it manufacturing? Is it transportation? Or are there certain formations like, say, cement or something like that can also yield a lot of emissions? The point of decarbonization is, can we optimize a lot of those processes or those technologies in ways where the future aspect of how much carbon gets removed or emitted in the future won't be as bad as what it could be if we didn't take that into account.
ESG integrity, and that is having confidence in your numbers, knowing where they come from, being reliable. If you're using assumptions, we use a lot of assumptions in ESG. Just by nature, we're making a lot of assumptions. Really having backup for all of that, having backup for claims that a marketing group might have put out there years ago that said, we're so sustainable, look at us. We need to dial that back and say, are you walking the walk? Because if you're saying one thing and doing another, data's gonna bite you. So we are always coming back to the fundamental data and saying, can we trust this? Is it believable? Is it auditable? And is it replicable?
The concept of mass balance, what goes into the system must come out, is something that I think is overlooked in a lot of these applications. By that, if one company sells high carbon credits or just high carbon assets to some other company, it might look good on paper for that one company doing the selling, but those assets don't go away. It just means that it becomes someone else's problem. That's not ESG. We have to understand what is the overall benefit to the system and what can lower the inputs and the outputs. By the oceans naturally is by way of pond. And what Chris was mentioning is my company, what we do is we seed the oceans with phytoplankton. Those are microscopic plants, and that's also the base of the food chain. And so in that scenario right there, what it is that we're able to do is we're able to bring oxygen back. We can solve environmental issues, but we can also do that because they bond that carbon with nitrogen, with phosphorus, with other elements that are also prominent in the waters. And we can solve 2 or 3 things with one technology. And those are the types of technologies from an innovation perspective that seem to be great.
The availability of data that we have today that we don't have, it's an unprecedented amount and it's growing exponentially. So what can we do with all of this information? We can take geospatial data, for instance, to figure out where do we want to locate the next office of our company? What route do I want to take to work? I mean, it's mind-blowing the things that you can do as an individual and as a company, as an investor with all of that information.
Energy efficiency is the lowest hanging fruit. It's super boring. No one has a ribbon cutting for a heat pump, but this stuff is really, really important and has some of the best ROI of anything that's available on the market right now.
I'm with business models that are taking waste from whether it's food supply chains or any sort of supply chain waste and building manufacturing process and delivery in some form of transformation. So taking waste and creating something that has a return both from a consumer standpoint and from the transition standpoint.